So today we'll be talking about empowering veterans with strength-based language. This will be our June COP. It's always very, very important that, we will be talking about best practices in HVRP. So it's very, very important that, you all consult your GODER before you implement any practice that we discuss in today's session. So as always, it's very, very important to consult your GODER, to discuss if it's anything we discuss is an allowable cost or an activity, or, if it requires an amendment to get approved. So please, an important reminder for everybody. Now, understanding strength-based language. I think this topic is extremely, extremely important. Communication and how we approach our veterans that we work with is extremely important. It highlights the strengths, the potential, and the values, rather than consoling the challenges and the deficits. So really, strength-based language is really about the communication approach. How are you approaching the veterans that we work with? And to actually keep this in a simplified form, I think about strength-based approach like a friend. So if you have a friend who's going through a hard time and they say, hey, I'm going through a hard time, what is your response as a friend? Typically, your response is not, hey, best of luck, good riddance. Your response is usually, oh, man, you're doing the best that you can under these circumstances. How can I best assist you? That's how you respond to a friend. That's strength-based language in a nutshell. It's really communicating belief in someone's ability to grow. So what is that communication that you're communicating to that person to grow? So if you look at the definition, it says strength-based language is a communication approach that highlights an individual's capabilities, achievements, and values and potential rather than focusing on the problems, the failures, and the deficits. It fosters empowerment and growth. Strength-based language helps a veteran see themselves as capable and resourceful, supporting their journey toward employment and stability. So this is strength-based language in a nutshell. How are you engaged with those veterans when they come to you? Obviously, we all know that we are working with veterans who have experienced some type of homelessness. So it's important that when we are communicating with our veterans, that we are highlighting the achievements, the values, and the potentials, because really that's how you get those veterans engaged and motivated to want to work. So I hope everybody kind of understands like the basis of what we'll be discussing today. We'll go into a deeper dive into what strength-based language is, what it looks like as far as in documentation, what does it look like in everyday communication with either, the veterans, with employers, with other service providers. So we'll go into more depth. Next slide, please. So why strength-based language? It encourages veterans to recognize their own strengths. Many people, and I put people in parentheses here because we all do it. So yes, we're talking about veterans, but this is something that we all do as human beings. Many people internalize messages of failure after unemployment, homelessness, or justice involvement. Strength-based language helps us focus on what they've accomplished and what they're capable of. We've already overcome a lot. Let's rebuild on that is more impactful. So really, like I said before, really focusing on, the accomplishments, what they want to do, what they're capable of, how can they grow, versus focusing on like, hey, I've gone through, unemployment, homelessness, or justice. We don't want to focus on that because a lot of what they've gone through before, and this is really trauma, they've internalized it. Even as people, we internalize messages between ourselves, when we have certain failures. So for us, we are that motivating tool to help those veterans get to where they need to be. It also builds confidence and motivation to reintegrate into the workforce. It is very hard to reintegrate into the workforce when you're used to a certain system. So we need to work with those veterans to build confidence and motivation to reintegrate into the workforce. The first step to employment is believing that you're employable. The first step is belief. Strength-based language gives us veterans permission to see themselves as capable. So in that first interaction, when you're doing that intake form, when you're first meeting with that veteran one-on-one, what are you communicating? What is your body language saying? Communication is also not just verbal, is also body language too. So look at all your nonverbals. How are you communicating to those veterans? How are you making sure that they're also believing that they're capable of going into employment? Words like persistent, disciplined, team-oriented, resilient affirm that past experiences has assets, not liabilities. When a veteran believes in their own potential, they're likely to engage in employment services, building skills, and career planning. So you want to shift the narrative from limitations to opportunities of growth. Everybody that you work with, every person that you will work with, there's some strength that there's in them. There are opportunities that are always present, that are always there. You may not always see them. It may not always be glaring at you, but everybody has a potential. Everybody has opportunities to grow. So veterans are not defined by their housing status or employment gaps. They are individuals with employment potential, life experience, and drive. Not what's wrong, but what's possible. That's even, and I'll go further into this. That's even, not only in your verbal communication, but also in your documentation, documenting what's possible versus looking at what is wrong. Because there are a lot of times when we're dealing with veterans who are experiencing homelessness, and we look at all the things, all the the missed opportunities, everything that they did wrong, but it's really about shifting that mindset and that focus to looking at what's possible and what are the opportunities available for this person to grow. Next slide, please. Again, when it comes to strength-based language, it aligns with person-centered services. Person-centered services treats every veteran as an expert on their own life and not passive like recipients of services. So really looking at the person as the individual, not treating every case as the same. Person-centered approaches avoids blame and recognize behavior has a response to past harm. I would actually even put past trauma. I am a firm believer that if you have experienced homelessness, you have experienced some type of trauma, and your response to that trauma could look differently across many people. If I got into an accident today, and my colleague Sarah got into an accident today, and it was the same exact accident, our response is going to be different, right? Our response is going to be different to that accident. And so that's a trauma response. So a lot of times when we have generalized services and we generalize every single interaction with every veteran, you may get one response from a veteran that's very, very positive. That does not mean you're going to get that same positive response from another veteran because the trauma response could be different. So it's always very, very important that you align your services being person-centered, looking at the individual with their own needs, and they're an expert on their own lives. So you don't want to kind of generalize all services and that interaction. You want to be as flexible as possible. It promotes dignity. Dignity is not a luxury. So for many veterans, particularly experienced homelessness or trauma, their dignity has been compromised by systems, stigma, and repeated rejection. And this is where that trauma response comes from. A lot of times, the system, the stigma, the repeated rejection. If I get rejected for a job, if I get rejected for housing, 3, 4 times, the likelihood of me going back to say I'm going to do it again is very, very slim. So dignity means I'm being treated as a full human with value and a voice. So you want to lead with respect, empathy, and affirmation. It sends a powerful message, you matter. When veterans feel like they matter, they're likely going to engage more. When you lead with respect, when you lead with empathy, understanding that I understand that you've been through something in your past that may have put you in this situation where you need this assistance, it is okay. You matter. You're important to us. It builds trust. Also, respect is not just about being polite. And I want to repeat that again. Respect is not just about being polite. Because you smile and you seem nice, it does not mean a person is going to receive that has respect. So it's about creating an emotional and psychological safety. Veterans who feel more respected are more likely to trust service providers, open up about their needs, and participate in services. Without that foundation, engagement often becomes superficial, defensive, or completely shut down. If I know it's the same old, hey, I've gone through this service provider, I've gone through that service provider, they've tried to help me, I've got denied, I've got rejected. And then you're coming to me as an HVRP provider and it's the same old message again and again. The likelihood of me being engaged or feeling like I can trust you, it's slim because you're not conversating with me. You're just trying to get, I look at it, you're just trying to get your numbers. And this is one of the reasons why we even say in the intake process, as much as possible, or that first interaction, first couple interactions, try not to feel like you're documenting. Try to ask those open-ended questions to really get to know the veteran. This is how you kind of build trust. Getting to know the veteran, asking open-ended questions about what their life, what their interests are, where do they see themselves in the next few years, what would they like for you to help them engage with, whether it's another service provider or whether it's employment services. This is extremely, extremely important. And then it promotes taking risk. Them signing up for HVRP is a risk. Them signing submitting a resume for a job is a risk. Them going on an interview is a risk. So people don't take risks when they feel like they expect to be judged, misunderstood, or dismissed. When we actively listen and reflect on the veterans' strengths back to them, we foster the kind of safe environment that makes risk taking possible. That's where transformation actually begins, not in programs, but in relationships built on trust and dignity. When I feel like, hey, I'm in a relationship where there's trust, where there's dignity, where somebody respects me, where they're looking out for my best interests, I will engage. That makes me feel like, okay, I can take this risk. That means that makes me feel like, hey, I got 4 rejections, but yes, I know that one yes is coming pretty soon because I have somebody on my corner. Next slide, please. Now, shifting focus. So all of this comes with shifting your focus. When we talk about strength-based language, it's really about shifting your focus. So this is like a deficit focused. You see the first list is a deficit focus, has anger issues, does not follow through, unemployed since 2017, lacks direction. All of that is deficit focus. It does not speak to opportunities. It does not highlight, man, we can still work with this person. All of this deficit focused language just says, I don't want to work with this person, or this person is not employable. But if you shift over to strength-based focus, it's the same messaging, but it's just different. It highlights the strengths, working on managing emotions, building consistency and follow-up tasks, re-entering the workforce with new goals, exploring new opportunities. And if you look at the strength-based focus language, it's just a minor tweak to it. But then if I'm a person who's reading it, I'm reading it as like, okay, there's potential for growth here, versus looking at the deficit focus where I am just looking at the deficits. I'm focused and solely highlighted on the deficits. And that's why even in the strength-based language, I told this to a lot of grantees, when you're talking to employers about a veteran or potentially trying to create a partnership with an employer, it is important to be strength-based focused in your language and your messaging. You want to, as much as possible, try to be strength-based focused, because that's where you see growth. If you highlight a lot of deficits, oh, this person has been homeless, for X amount of years. This person has these issues and that issue. All of a sudden, the focus is on deficit and they're not really focused on strength-based. So shifting that mindset to strength-based focused language will help your programs tremendously. Next slide, please. So strength-based language in documentation and case notes. This is extremely, extremely important. I think it's very important that we understand that our case notes are like legal documents also. So they can be reviewed by anybody. You have funders, you have Department of Labor, you have auditors who may view it. You even have veterans who may request to review their case notes. When I was a case manager, this happened to us a few times where clients of ours demanded that they get case notes on what the case manager was documenting about them. And we had to provide those case notes. So in our language and how we communicate in our case notes is extremely, extremely important. And so you don't want to use a lot of that deficit language when you're communicating. So for example, like non-compliant, you can use unmotivated versus using non-compliant, because non-compliant just means this person is not willing to work with me. There's no other way I can work with this, versus using unmotivated, where it's like, okay, how can we get this person motivated versus using the language of non-compliant, because non-compliant means the case is closed. Next slide, please. So, like I said before, why it matters. Case notes are not just internal. They may be reviewed by the Department of Labor, funders, auditors, or participants. Participants themselves. Language shapes perception. So once you speak, whatever you document and speak, it shapes the perception of how somebody is going to view that individual. It can either reinforce shame or promote empowerment. So looking at your case notes, as service providers, you can look at I can look at a case note and I can tell you, oh, this is reinforcing shame, or this is actually promoting empowerment. So internalized messages influence self-esteem and motivation. Language in case notes can either reinforce shame, inadequacy, empowerment. People live up or down to the labels we give them. So it's extremely important that we make sure that we're not labeling veterans that we're working with. And I'm going to take a deeper dive into those labels and what they look like, because a lot of pushback that that we get is that, well, if this is actually happening, I need to document that this is actually happening. But I'm going to actually show you how you don't need to document that way. You can document in a way that you could still relate the same message without labeling an individual. Next slide, please. So phrases to use and phrases to avoid. Like I said before, non-compliant, unmotivated, fail to engage, refuse services, high risk. These are phrases that we want to try to, like, as much as possible, try to kind of shift away from a little bit, and then use something, instead of using those phrases like non-compliant, unmotivated, fail to engage. You want to use language like express concerns about the plan, identifying meaningful goals, taking time to build trust, decline services at this time. Decline services at this time is extremely important. Yes, they refuse services, but at this time, that little change of at this time is extremely important, because that leaves it open, right? That eventually this person may come back for services. So services are not closed where this person just absolutely does not want services. But maybe at that time, this veteran is not ready for those services. So they decline services at this time. And then also facing multiple challenges. You leave it open-ended. You don't have to go into full detail as to every single challenge that they have, but you can also put there facing multiple challenges. Next slide, please. Now, this does not ignore the common barriers that veterans face every day. So yes, we are saying that you should use more strength-based language, but this does not, take away from the barriers that veterans face every day. So I just want to make sure that I highlight that. Yes, we understand that, post-traumatic stress, PTSD is there. We understand the employment gaps that some veterans face. We understand the mental health challenges, housing instability, and civilian navigation disconnection. Trying to get connected back to services, trying to connect back to civilian life, navigating all those services. We understand all those challenges. These are some of the most common challenges that veterans face. So we are highlighting strength-based language, but we're also not ignoring the common barriers that veterans face every day. Next slide, please. Now, there's some core principles when it comes to strength-based work. Um, these principles kind of just guide the work that we do when it comes to strength-based language. So, just talking about every person has strengths. Language shapes identity. We want to focus on potential, and then also context matters. So next slide, please. I'll kind of take a deeper dive into all of these. So every person has strengths. Like I said this before, all veterans, regardless of circumstance, bring value, resilience, and skills. Strengths may come in form of roles, life experience, and personal trait. Our job is to uncover, as HVRP grantees, our job is to uncover and affirm those strengths, even when they aren't obvious. And like I said before earlier, some of veterans that we are going to be working with, they're not going to become, you're not going to see all those strengths highlighted in bold when they come to you. Some of those we're going to have to pull out. And a lot of that comes from the engagement, the open-ended questions that we ask. We can pull a lot of those skill sets out of them. We can talk to them about the life experience, the personal traits that they have. This is how we create their resume. This is how we build, we present them to the employers that we're working with. We have to engage with them that way. We have to be trauma informed. We have to ask those open-ended questions to get that information out. Language shapes identity. Words influence how participants feel, engage, and pursue goals. Words also influence the employers that we are working with to get veterans engaged, get veterans employed. So words have influence, not just on the participants who are the veterans, but also employers and even external agencies that you're going to be working with. Also, words have influence. Positive person first, future-oriented language builds trust and motivation. Avoid labels that define people by their challenge. Extremely important. Avoid labels that define people by their challenge. Veterans internalize the way they are spoken to and about. When we frame our story with respect and hope, we help them rewrite how they see themselves. This is extremely important when you're talking, when you're engaging. It's important that regardless of who you're communicating to, that you frame their story with respect and hope, because veterans that we're working with are already internalizing a lot of stuff. People are reaching out. People are in their ears about this is what you should do. This is how you should get services. This is how this service provider has this meeting, that meeting. They're pulled in so many different directions sometimes that it's important that we as service providers frame that story, and treat them with respect and hope, so that they don't see themselves as the limitations, has being unemployed, all those things that they internalize. We don't want that for those veterans that we work with. Next slide, please. Focus on potential. HVRP isn't fixing veterans, it's about revealing possibility. So you're not fixing people when you're in the HVRP. The focus is about really revealing the possibility. We highlight future growth, not past struggle. We guide veterans to envision what could be, not just what has been. Context matters. Behavior must be understood in light of circumstance, not judged in isolation. So if you have an individual, for whatever reason, may not be engaged in services, you have to understand, okay, what is the reason why this is happening? Like, there's an underlying reason why this is happening. I think about it like a child. If a child displays some type of behavior that we know is not well, I would guess normal, we don't say, okay, there's something wrong with that child. We ask, like, what is the underlying circumstance that caused this child to act this way? And I think that's the way we need to treat, we need to think about the context in which we work with veterans. What is the underlying thing happening? So it's important that we don't judge. And then avoid one-size-fits-all approaches. Like I said this before, strength shows up differently for each person. So people react differently to their circumstances. So as much as possible, try to be as flexible as possible and understand the context of where people come, their backgrounds, and how they respond to services may look differently. So as case managers, as employment specialists, as program managers, we have to understand that and be flexible to understand that veterans may show up in different forms, shapes, and they may respond differently to services. And like I said, lastly, veterans may internalize the way they're spoken to and about. So we have to be very, very careful in our language and how people may take how we speak to them. And I also think it's important that not just verbally, but also body language. I tend to think that, I would say, and this is just my opinion, like 70% of communication is body language. So how they see you, are you rolling your eyes when they're telling you about, some of their past struggle? Like, what is your body language? Are you there with a straight face? Are you slumped over? Are you, What is your body language also conveying to that veteran? So it's important that we understand all these things because we're dealing with veterans who have experienced some type of trauma by being homeless. Next slide, please. Labeling, reframing labels with compassion. Labels like difficult, manipulative, often reflect our discomfort, not the participant's intent. So it's important that when you're documenting that you're not reflecting your discomfort with something that the veteran is doing because it may not be the participant's intent. Reframing helps us move from judgment to curiosity and builds a stronger relationships. Strength-based language affirms the veteran's dignity, supports healing, and encourages engagement. Veterans may already carry labels from institutions such as the military, such as maybe their legal background, or in shelter systems. I myself working in shelter systems, I can definitely say that this is true, that there are labels that individuals carry from those systems. So it's important that, as much as possible that we reframe our labeling, because a lot of veterans do carry those labels. Our language can either reinforce stigma or disrupt it with respect and compassion. Reframing shifts focus from what's wrong to what's working. When we reframe, we create a space for empathy and effectiveness. It's not just about ignoring, behavior, but understanding what's behind it and how it reflects a deeper strength and survival strategy. Really just, you're not ignoring the behavior, but you're trying to understand like what's really behind this. If you have a veteran that's non-responsive, like what's behind it? If you have a veteran who's not engaged and you're trying to figure out like there's something deeper behind why that is. And so our job also is to create that space of empathy and effectiveness to reframe how we just have those discussions with them. And I always say those open-ended questions are extremely, extremely important. Engage, engage, engage. Next slide. Reframing labels that come with compassion. Like I already talked about this before. The common labels: withdrawn, aggressive. The reframe strength-based term, advocates for needs, cautious in new spaces, resourceful, assertive. And this is the context. So speaks up, asks questions, may resist systems that haven't worked for them, taking time to assess safety and trustworthiness, using creativity to meet needs when options are limited, expresses needs firmly, may lack tools for regulation, but has compassion and urgency. So these are some ways that we can, interpret what, these common labels people use, how we can shift it to strength-based language and terms, especially when we're documenting or also speaking to veterans. Next. So there are some unique strengths of veterans that are experiencing homelessness. When I was doing these slides and looking for unique strengths of veterans experiencing homelessness, I really had to do some deep thought and do some deep thinking when it comes to highlighting these strengths. But us as service providers, this is what we also need to do. We need to talk to our veterans. We need to figure out, okay, what are the strengths that this person possesses? What are those unique skills that they have before in the past? Next slide, please. And I can go into more details in the next slide. So when it comes to military to civilian, there are many transferable skills. So veterans don't always recognize their own journeys reflect employability. So there are a lot of times where we have veterans who may not think, oh, yes, I have this past military experience, but I haven't worked in a long time. They may not see themselves as somebody's going to hire me. HVRP staff play a critical role in drawing out these assets, validating their lived experience, and helping them confidently tell their stories to employers. Common strengths gained from non-traditional paths, leadership under pressure, very much mission-focused mindset, team collaboration, discipline, and accountability. These are things that you can use, in your resumes talking to employers about how to transfer those military skills into civilian language. As service providers, we must challenge the belief that only formal education or jobs are valid work experience. Veterans have built skill sets that are transferable into valuable contributions in the workplace. Part of your role is helping veterans and employers see these connections clearly. Next, I'm going to take a deeper dive into all those common strengths. Um, Employers consistently value candidates who can work well on teams, keep long-term goals in focus. These strengths should be emphasized when preparing veterans for interviews or career paths. And so we're going to take a deeper dive into those core strengths. Next slide, please. So when we talk about those core strengths, leadership, veterans often lead under high stress and high stakes conditions. Skilled in decision-making, delegation, and accountability, brings a calm, confident presence to work environments. When it comes to discipline, trained to follow protocols and complete tasks thoroughly, demonstrate commitments to routines, schedules, and reliability, and often brings a strong internal drive to meet and exceed expectations. Next slide, please. Teamwork. Veterans are trained to operate in units where collaboration is critical, understand how to communicate across teams and support peer success, value mutual accountability, and a shared sense of purpose. Mission focused. Veterans are goal-oriented and committed to seeing tasks through, able to stay focused and be productive despite obstacles or changing circumstance, thrive in environments where roles are clear and objectives are measurable. So those are just some quick highlights that I used, but this is something that you can use when you're maybe creating a cover letter, maybe talking to an employer, maybe even in the resume. These are these tools that you can use when trying to get those veterans employed. Trauma informed and person first language is extremely important. It's always good to be trauma informed. Really trauma informed really is you have to have the understanding that people have gone through some type of traumatic situation. Understanding how they respond and how they react to that trauma is the basic foundation of being trauma informed. Person first language sends the message that you are more than your current circumstance. So they're looking past the circumstances, but actually looking at the individual as a person. So prioritize the individual over the circumstance or condition, reduces stigma, and reinforces dignity. Reinforces that people are not defined by homelessness, unemployment, or disability. Set the tone for services that is empowering. And this is how you set that tone. From the very first interaction, you want to set that tone that you are there to empower this individual, regardless of what their background is, what they've done before in the past, their justice involved, their employment history. You want to make sure that you're setting that tone that we're going to be an agency of empowering veterans. And this aligns with HVRP goals. Empower, empower, empower. Next slide, please. Okay, applying strength-based language to HVRP. So when applying strength-based language to workforce reintegration, reframing work history gaps and justice involvement is extremely important. Helping veterans identify transferable skills, supporting resume and interview prep with strength-based framing. Examples of strength-based prompts, what have you overcome versus what skills did you use to get through that? Tell me something, tell me about a time you led or supported a team. So you can see how reframing, those work history gaps or being justice involved can shift. And these are some examples that we have provided below on that strength-based prompt. Next slide. Okay, so I am going to switch off here. I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Sarah, who is going to, finish the rest of the presentation. But it was been a pleasure talking to everybody. And Sarah, take it.
Thank you, Tim. Beautifully said. So on to practical applications. How do we use all that information that Tim ever so eloquently walked us through, and how do we use that in a practical way every single day as a case manager? And so let's go into that. So applying strength-based language to workforce integration. So as Tim mentioned, we're reframing the work history gaps, right? And so what not to say, practical applications. As Tim mentioned, deficit-based language is something that we're trying so hard not to use, whether that is in our body language, whether that is what we're saying vocally, as well as our case notes, as well as the information that we are sharing with others. We're mindful about all aspects in which we use language. And so things not to say, for example, this veteran that I'm working with, they haven't worked in years, right? Or you might also hear they've been unemployed since they were discharged. You might also hear, well, the gap is due to them experiencing homelessness. They dealt with some mental health challenges, as well as some substance use challenges. Even the words challenges can hold negative stigma in ways, as well as the word issues. So we have to be very, very careful on the way in which we're using words as well. And so when we're reframing from deficit-based language to strength-based, we really need to focus on personal development. So for example, rather than saying, this person had a gap in their work history due to incarceration or due to, dealing with some issues with mental health. Rather than saying that, we'll say things like, oh, the veteran that I'm working with focused on personal development and recovery and is now ready to re-engage in the workforce, right? You're just shifting that focus from perhaps what our brains might have told us to say in the past into how we're reframing it into something more strength-based and positive. Another great example on language to use. This veteran that I'm working for is dedicated, time managing health. Now they are equipped with increased resilience and self-awareness, right? This slide here is a great snapshot for you to take. Even as you're talking to other agencies that you work with, as you're helping to coach the veterans that you work with, this is really great just to get your team consistent on the same page around using these sorts of sentences that are strength-based. Another, volunteered at a shelter and mentored peers and demonstrated leadership and commitment, right? That is a great example of someone who perhaps did have a gap in their work history, but then they took on volunteer roles and mentorship roles so they could further be a good member of the community and show that commitment, right? Next one, the veteran completed vocational training during the gap period, and they continued persistence in a growth mindset, right? That really highlights that there was a gap, but what they were doing in that time to really build themselves back up and get into a good place, right? And then also HVRP staff can ask, what did you learn about yourself during that time that will help you succeed at work? And so when you're talking directly with a veteran, you're absolutely focused on that strength-based language, right? And you're asking those open-ended questions through motivational interviewing. What did you learn about yourself that can help you to succeed at work? You're reframing even the questions that you're asking the veteran to be very strength-based. And as Tim said, that really helps to lift them up and show them that you're encouraging them. You're in their corner. You see their value, right? And you really do believe in them. They really just need that positivity on their side constantly. And so now let's talk about reframing justice involvement. This is a hot topic that comes up in technical assistance sessions a lot. So what not to say, deficit-based language. Yeah, the veteran I'm working for, they've got a criminal record. Or, oh yeah, they've got a felony. Or yes, they have some prior experience with being incarcerated. They were recently released from prison. Yes, they're a convicted felon, right? I think we hear that a lot as just sort of, the transparency of things. I work with a lot of grant recipients that say, shouldn't we just have our grant recipients, our participants be as transparent as possible? And I say, well, there's a fine line between being as transparent as possible and saying too much, right? We don't want to say too much. We want to say just enough in a strength-based way that helps the person on the other side to see that this is somebody who's awesome, who they do want to hire, who has worked a lot towards their self-perseverance and their self-value and their self-worth, which is wonderful. And so let's talk about the strength-based reframe. So instead of saying all of those things that were on the slide before, oh, this veteran has been incarcerated, they were just released from prison, all of that, a strength-based reframe could be, oh, well, this veteran that I'm working for successfully completed reentry and is highly motivated and contributes positively to the team, right? And so that's exactly saying what was on those on the slide before, but in a strength-based way without giving too much information. Next one here, the veteran that I'm working with demonstrated accountability and has shown sustained commitment to personal growth. Right? These are really important things for us to even coach our veterans to get used to saying about themselves when they're talking to other veterans, when they're talking to their friends, when they're at interviews, when they're in networking events, when they're at job clubs. You know, we have to help them through coaching to be able to speak like this, even about themselves. And then the more that they're speaking about this, you know, about themselves externally, you know, slowly we can help them to learn that they have to start thinking those positive thoughts internally as well, because just saying them out loud is not enough. We need to also say kind things to ourselves in a strength-based way as well. Last bullet here, the veteran that I'm working with has overcome significant obstacles and brings a strong sense of responsibility and continued determination, right? These are powerful statements that are absolutely true, that are not deficit based at all, and shows a forward momentum of growth, self-awareness, which is very, very intentional. Next slide here, continuing to reframe justice involvement, for example, for resume building, as you're helping the veterans that we serve to build out their resumes. Perhaps before we would say a 4-year employment gap due to incarceration, not a great thing to say, very deficit based. But a better way to say that in a strength-based way is this veteran has completed a state-accredited vocational program and mentored peers while navigating a period of self-care. Now they're prepared to apply those transferable skills in a professional setting and be a wonderful asset to anyone's team, a valuable asset to anyone's team. Right? So you can sort of play with these sentences and play with these words and continue to add on to them and really use these words as an example. And of course, we will be sharing these slides on the NVTAC website after. And so you're able to really dive in a little bit deeper if you'd like. And so continuing to reframe the justice involvement, coaching employers with strength-based messaging. Before, we would say a 4-year employment gap again, due to incarceration. Oh, sorry, here's a bit of a repeat. Forgive me on that one. And so let's go ahead and have a little bit of a recap. And so strength-based language reinforces, as Tim said, dignity, autonomy, and employability. It helps that veteran to refocus on their values and truly the awesomeness inside of them. And as Tim mentioned, you know, being beat down by the system and being turned away for housing options and being turned away, you know, from various opportunities really does chisel away at the heart and the self-esteem. And so coming in to HVRP and having case managers approach case management differently than perhaps the case manager that they're working with over at their mental health facility that they're working with, or perhaps their housing case manager, we can do things differently with an HVRP in a strength-based way that the veterans might actually not be quite used to, because they are probably used to the deficit-based sort of approach that a lot of case managers, unfortunately, in other systems might take. And so we're encouraging all of our HVRP staff to be on the same page as far as consistency around using strength-based language. And so we're practicing self-reflection, right? For ourselves. How does our language impact participants' outcomes? I understand on a real level, we as case managers and direct service staff, that secondary trauma is real, right? And we get burned out, especially if we're not taking care of ourselves. And so we can oftentimes, even without meaning to, we've heard certain things 1,000 times. We're working with a veteran and they've told us 1,000,000 times that they're going to do this, that, and the other, and they're just not doing it. And we're noticing that our own language may be impacting their outcomes. And as much as we want them to move forward in a positive direction, there are times where we as ourselves as case managers can get frustrated. And those are the times where we have to really check ourselves and ensure that we are using strength-based language, and even kindly check our colleagues, right? There are times where we're just not in the mode, and perhaps we're not realizing that maybe we did roll our eyes a little bit because we've heard it 1,000 times. If you need to tap out, if you need to talk to your supervisor and kind of have another mode of sort of caring for yourself, ensuring that you do have reinforcements even for yourself around getting some help around counseling. That secondary trauma is real, and that's why we must be super careful about the way that we're utilizing language. Also, sharing positive narratives in team meetings, right? You can be the lead on this. You might notice in your team meetings when you're doing case conferencing, with other agencies in the community, or even with your own team when you're in, meetings with your supervisor, be very mindful about the ways in which you are speaking about the clients that you serve, and ensure that you're sharing positive narrations, positive narratives about your participants, even in team meetings, and you can be the lead on that. And you can lead by example for your colleagues. Also, celebrating the small wins with participants, right? That shows positivity. That shows that you're keeping track and you're very intentional about celebrating those small wins, because celebrating small wins along the way also helps with that veteran engagement and that veteran buy-in that we hear tons of trends about throughout the nation within HVRP grant recipients, needing more strategies for that veteran buy-in. Truly celebrating those small wins and practicing with intention, strength-based language, that is a huge, huge, huge way to keep veterans to keep coming back and want to work with your staff. Next one, incorporating strength-based language check-ins during team meetings. Constantly reminding your team just in a positive way to think in a strength-based way, right? And then second but last, encouraging success boards or shared wins to reinforce culture, right? As cheesy as it might sound, if we are intentional about surrounding ourselves with positivity and surrounding ourselves with ensuring that we are talking in a strength-based way, that truly will take over us. And then we will just be so natural at reinforcing positivity and encouraging success in that way. A lot of times we need to see visuals of success in order for us to continue to practice, right? And so if we can visually see things on the wall, if we've got sort of a celebration wall or an achievements wall or a success board or those sorts of things, that's going to really lift our spirits too. And then last bullet here, we're being specific about what the veteran is doing, not just what they haven't done, right? And so it's really reframing the things that they are working on rather than the promises that they're not keeping, right? We're keeping track of the positivity rather than the things that they're perhaps not following through with. And we're reframing that for them to hear as well. We have some really wonderful resources that you can look up that can give you just more insight on strength-based language, strength-based versus deficit language through the U.S. Department Office of Justice program. Some wonderful examples there. Also, the Strength at Home, Friends and Family Intervention, great information there on a case study about how veterans were reintegrated back into the civilian workforce and life in a strength-based way versus what happens with veterans when they're not reintegrated into the civilian life in a deficits-based way. It's quite an interesting read. Also, Concept of Trauma and Guidance for Trauma-Informed Approach, and then the National Alliance to End Homelessness, Applying Strength-Based Approaches. These are some really helpful resources. And so we did want to hear from you all on the line. Please, do you have any examples and or tips on how you currently use strength-based language to reframe? We would love to hear how it's working for you all already in your HVRP and how you're utilizing these skills currently. Please raise your hand, add it in the chat. We would love for you to give us some concrete applications. And I will keep track here of the chat. let's see. And we do, of course, have a survey in the chat that we would love to get your insight on. Please let us know. Do you have any tips? Do you have any examples on how you're using strength-based language with the participants that you serve? Or are you experiencing any challenges, right? Have you tried, just like the rest of us, people who have been case managers? Was there ever a time where you just were feeling burned out and you were sort of using deficit-based language, and you could feel that impact? Yes, if you raise your hand, we can enable your microphone. Okay, please raise your hand and we will enable your microphone. All right, Felicia, we will go ahead and unmute you. I will. Okay, I'm going to allow your mic. Great. You can unmute, please. Hello.
Hello. For the strength-based language, I think that it's something that I find super beneficial because I think it does kind of the more that you do it, the more that it becomes second nature. And I think that it's a balance of both understanding that the barrier is very real, while also focusing on the strengths. It's kind of like, I know for our program we use the individual success plans, and we have like strengths and resources identified, and in that allowing having a conversation with the client about what strengths they have going into this process and the resources that they have, and also reminding them that part of their resources also are organization and maybe their other case management teams that they are working with. I think one is definitely, as clients are like a struggle or a challenge in it, is sometimes it's very hard to use strength languages with clients who are struggling with like depression, anxiety, or a lot of self-loathing, and some of that kind of combating that negative self-talk that some folks can really struggle with interpersonally. And that's not something that we as HVRP case managers can change. Yeah, we can control our language to them and encourage it, but that's something that can be pretty difficult.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was just lovely. I appreciate that insight so much. And one thing that you did too mention was that you're even mindful of using strength-based languages. You're helping them build out their individualized success plans or their individualized employment plans. And you're exactly right. We can highlight strengths often in those IEPs, and we should. And even the way that we're asking questions as we're helping them to, identify their goals and their values as stated in the IEP, we're absolutely mindful as we build that out on using strength-based language. And you're right that, we can only do what we can do and continue to practice that and work that muscle memory, and hope that, it rubs off on them. Great. Any other examples from anyone? Please raise your hand. We would love to hear from you. Please unmute yourself, and then we'll be able to unmute you. Or go ahead and write it in the chat. We'd love to hear any tips, any examples, or any challenges on using or trying to use strength-based language. Yes, Sabina, we will go ahead and unmute you. I'm allowing Mike now. Okay, great. You can unmute yourself. Hello. Oh, okay. Let me try again. Disable mic. Okay. Okay. Can you speak now, Sabina? One more time. Okay. Try to unmute yourself now. Sorry. Okay. You should be able to hit the mute. No.
Oh, there I am.
Hi, Sabina.
Hi, I just wanted to chime in real quick. When I sit in with a veteran the first time, whether it's on the phone or in person, and I read back the intake information, so we go through the barriers what they've overcome. And I do try to use those type of strength building language. When I read it back to them, they just light up, and or they're so impressed that someone was listening when they hear their own words back at them. And that, I think, is the best start when enrolling them into the HVRP program, because it's encouraging. It makes them feel like they have hope, and they feel like they're progressing. And then the part where short-term, long-term goals, you know, I tell them you can mark those milestones and see how far you've come, and know that your work and your commitment to the program is working. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much for sharing
Thank-
that. You're right. Oh, yes, Tim, jump in, please.
No, I was going to say thank you for that. I think one of the things that you said that you highlighted was mirroring the words that they use back to them. So, like, for example, like a veteran could say, you know, I want to feel useful again. I want to feel productive again. And so you reflect exactly what they say, and, you know, you reflect what they say back to them, you know, using the same language. So let's look at ways that you can be more useful and contribute more. Like, let's look at those ways. So using those words reflective back to them is extremely, extremely important. And that's when you get that aha moment where it's like, oh, wow, like they use the exact same thing I said and they reflected it back on me. So I just want to highlight that.
And thank you. And one thing that, you said too, that kind of got my mind moving is, the intention of using strength-based language and someone hearing that for the first time, when, especially in a case management situation they're not used to, can make the veterans that you're serving a little bit emotional. I've been in situations as a case manager where just asking questions in a strength-based way or building out the individualized employment plan or housing plan, setting aside that safe space and asking them questions in an affirming strength-based way. If it's the first time they're experiencing this type of respect, it can make them a little bit emotional. And so, those are just things that help you all to see that you're doing it in the right way, and that your approach is different than other case managers that they have experience with. And so thank you so much for providing that insight.
Yeah. And I think it's extremely important especially when somebody's talking about some of the barriers and challenges that they're having. One of the things that I did as a case manager, especially when I worked in like domestic violence, one of the things that I did was I always kind of kept a smile on my face. So even if you're telling me your barriers, and a lot of times clients will look at me and say, oh my gosh, I'm telling you all these horrible things, and you just have like a smile on your face. And it's just like, yeah, I understand that there are barriers, but we're going to overcome them. Like, you're going to overcome these barriers. And I speak with that confidence, and I instill that confidence on those clients that I interact with, because it's the ability to like show them that there is another side, right? And I always, I use parables sometimes. I always say, hey, when the rain is coming, it's gonna rain hard, but there's sunshine at the end of the rain, right? There's always gonna be that sunlight. There's gonna be that rainbow at the end of the rain. So, hey, you might be in this hole or in this deficit right now, but we're gonna climb ourselves out of this. We're not gonna jump out, because there are a lot of times where clients may be in a hole and they just think automatically, I'm gonna hop out. No, we're going to climb out of it, but we're going to be here to guide you through that process. So whatever you need, how you need to get there, we're going to be there every step of the way to guide you through that process. We're going to gradually get ourselves out of this hole. We're not going to hop out. It's not going to happen overnight, but we're going to gradually. And you just infuse that in them. You just keep infusing that in them. That's what gets them motivated. And that's how you use kind of, reframe that language. So they don't see their challenges as deficits that just keeps them in a box. They see outside of that box.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Tim. Any other people want to chime in here on this question, provide any tips in ways that you use strength-based language, anything that you'd like to share here? Okay, let's just keep moving right along. Are there any questions that anybody has? Please feel free to raise your hand if you've got any questions. Checking here. We've got any. Questions, comments? Okay, well, thank you all so much for joining our community of practice for June. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate all of the insight and all of the care. Thank you for even caring about this topic. We are definitely here to help you in any way, shape, or form with your TA needs. So please do not hesitate to reach out, whether you're going through challenges or you've got some best practices or innovative strategies to share. We want to hear it all. We would love to work with you. So please email us here at nvtac@dol.gov. Of course, you know our nvtac.org website, a variety of tools and resources for you. So please do not hesitate to get yourself well versed with the website there. And so thank you all again so much for your time and have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you.